Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When we bought our dream home, I expected peace and quiet, not a turf war with a clipboard-wielding HOA queen named Karen. What began as neighborly hellos soon spiraled into a full-blown battle of property lines, petty power plays, and the most outrageous garage you'll ever hear about. When my wife Julia and I bought the house, I thought we were finally stepping into the calm suburban dream everyone talks about. After years of apartment walls so thin you could hear your neighbor sneeze, the idea of a detached home with a real backyard felt like luxury. I'm an engineer by trade. Logical, measured, someone who appreciates good planning and boundaries. That's why this place spoke to me. A corner lot with a wide side strip of land, perfect for a future garden or a play area for our daughter, Sophie. It wasn't fenced in yet, but that was intentional. I wanted to take my time and design something beautiful in the spring, maybe build a deck, landscape a bit, put in native plants. It was our canvas. The first few weeks were magical. Julia and I would sit out in folding chairs and talk about what this yard could become. Sophie would chase butterflies or run through the grass with her toy fire truck. Every time I looked out of the window, I'd think, this is ours. We built this life. And then there was Karen. We met her on day 4. She appeared like she'd been waiting for the moving truck to leave. 50-something, sharp bob haircut, pressed khakis, a clipboard that may as well have been surgically attached to her arm. "I'm Karen," she said, smiling just wide enough to show she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm on the HOA board." Well, technically, I am the board right now. Things tend to get lax if you don't have someone keeping an eye on things. At first, I thought she was just being neighborly. She dropped off a printout of helpful community tips, which turned out to be a 10-page packet on mailbox colors, lawn edging preferences, and approved decorative elements. I laughed it off and thanked her. Julie and I even joked about it later. Stepford wives meet suburban Oregon, but the charm faded quickly. Karen began stopping by unannounced, usually when I was in the middle of something. "Just a heads up," she'd say. "Your trash bins were about 3 inches past the sidewalk line this morning. We usually keep them tucked in." Or, "I noticed some packing materials near your porch. HOA rules recommend keeping curb appeal high, even during move-ins." It became clear that Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was the self-appointed sheriff of law and order. One day, I caught her taking pictures of my side yard. I stepped outside and asked if everything was okay. She didn't flinch. "Oh, don't mind me. Just documenting the neighborhood's condition in case we need to issue any friendly reminders later." Still, I didn't push back. I figured she'd lose interest once we settled in and proved we weren't the type to let the house fall into disrepair. But I underestimated Karen. What I took as mild meddling was just the opening act. There was something about the way she lingered by the property line, like she was mentally measuring it. She'd mention odd things too, like, "That extra strip of land next to your lot really adds curb appeal." I remember when the old owner said it just sort of blended into the rest of the neighborhood. At the time, it sounded like small talk. Looking back, it was something else entirely, a seed, an idea. And while I was picturing a vegetable garden, Karen was picturing something far more concrete. Spring arrived, and with it, a much-needed family vacation. Julia had been dying to get away from the stress of her job, and Sophie had never seen the ocean. We booked 2 weeks in Maui, something we talked about doing for years but never quite found the time or money for. It was paradise. Beach mornings, shaved ice afternoons, and quiet nights listening to waves instead of leaf blowers. For a while, the Karen situation faded into the background noise of our lives. I almost convinced myself she was harmless. Overbearing? Sure, but not dangerous. When we pulled into the driveway after our red-eye flight, tired but sun-kissed and happy, I noticed something strange right away. Our side yard, the wide strip of land between our house and Karen's, looked different. It took me a second to process it. Julia saw it too and blinked like she was trying to clear her eyes. Standing near the edge of our property, half on her side and half on ours, was a gleaming white double-bay garage. Fresh concrete, new siding, modern trim, like it had been dropped there by a suburban spaceship. It looked almost too clean, too symmetrical, like something from a catalog. And yet, it sat smugly, unapologetically, right where our landscape plan was supposed to begin. I got out of the car slowly, like approaching a wild animal. That wasn't there when we left, right? I asked Julia. She didn't answer, just stared with her mouth slightly open. Sophie, oblivious, asked if the neighbors were building a robot house. I kind of wished they were. That would have been easier to deal with. I walked along the edge of the new structure, checking where the concrete met the earth. It didn't take long to realize the truth. The building, garage, or whatever Karen wanted to call it, was on our land, not just brushing against it. It extended a full 2.5 meters into our property. I knew it before I even pulled up the GPS plot on my phone, but I did it anyway, just to be sure. The boundary was crystal clear, and now it was violated. My first thought was, this has to be a mistake. A contractor's miscalculation, maybe a misunderstanding about the lot lines. So I marched next door, pulse already rising, and knocked. Karen opened the door like she was expecting a delivery. "Alex," she beamed. "You're back. How was the island? You got some sun?" I forced a smile. "Hey, yeah, it was nice. Quick question. That garage." She tilted her head, playing innocent. "The garage? The brand new 2-car garage sitting on the edge of your lot. The one that's partially on my lot." She blinked, then laughed lightly. "Oh, that garage. I didn't think you'd notice so quickly." I stared. I noticed immediately. "Well, listen, we've been planning that for years. It's a little family project. My nephew designed it himself, and honestly, it turned out better than we hoped. But it's on my land." Karen gave me the kind of look people give when they think you're being unnecessarily difficult. "Now don't be dramatic, Alex. It's barely a few feet. That land was always just empty. The previous owner and I had an understanding. It wasn't a big deal to him." "That's not in any documents," I replied, already annoyed. "And it is a big deal to me. That's our property." She smiled again, tighter this time. "Well, we got permission from the HOA, so it's all above board." I blinked. "Karen, the HOA doesn't have authority over private land boundaries." She gave a little shrug, like she was indulging a child throwing a tantrum. "Well, you can talk to the board if you'd like. But if you want to start a big fight over a few feet of grass, that's your call. I just think it's a shame to make a fuss when everything's been improved. Really, we did the neighborhood a favor." I stood there, jaw tightening. This wasn't a mistake. This was premeditated. And I had a sinking feeling it was only the beginning. I should have known Karen wouldn't stop with just a smile and a shrug. Within 3 days of our return, I received a neatly folded letter taped to my mailbox in an envelope marked with the HOA logo. It read like it was written by someone who had taken a business communication course and misunderstood every lesson. The tone was passive-aggressive poetry. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, it has come to our attention that your property is currently in visual dissonance with the recent neighborhood enhancements. The HOA has received positive feedback on the newly constructed garage adjacent to your home, and we would like to advise you on how to maintain aesthetic harmony moving forward." Aesthetic harmony. The building was on my land. I wasn't the one causing visual dissonance. I was the one being invaded. But according to the letter, I was being encouraged to plant hedges along the structure to frame the new shared view and consider matching exterior paint tones in the spirit of neighborly cohesion. That same day, a man in a polo shirt and khakis with a clipboard strolled onto my lawn. No knock, no permission, no shame. I caught him casually taking measurements of the strip between the garage and my driveway. When I confronted him, he introduced himself as a volunteer landscaping assessor for the HOA. According to him, they were exploring options for integrating the visual flow between neighboring parcels. In other words, they were trying to design my yard to match her garage. I told him in very clear terms to leave my property immediately. He looked surprised, almost offended, then jotted something down and walked off like I'd just failed a personality test. The next day brought a flyer in the mailbox, a brightly colored pamphlet titled "Curb Appeal is Community Spirit," with pictures of happy neighbors and an annotated photo of my yard outlined in red with arrows pointing at suggested enhancements. I stared at it in disbelief. It was like being publicly shamed via graphic design. And then came the zoning survey. A printed notice taped to my door announced that the HOA would be performing a non-invasive visual boundary review of select properties. Mine was listed, along with 3 others. except I hadn't requested anything, and this wasn't an official city surveyor. When I called the number listed, a woman named Deborah from the Aesthetic Development Subcommittee told me the HOA had special discretion when structures of interest were involved. Structures of interest. They were treating the garage like a national landmark, and I was just some obstacle ruining the view. At this point, I tried to go through proper channels. I attended the next HOA meeting, my first, and brought copies of my property survey, the GPS data, and aerial photos taken before and after the construction. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse where they served stale cookies and judgment. Karen sat at the head of the folding table council like a queen in exile. I laid out my case calmly, methodically. When I pointed to the photos that clearly showed the garage encroaching on my land, Karen raised a hand and said, "Let's not get caught up in inches and metrics. This is about community, cooperation, spirit." A few people nodded. One woman even clapped. I was dumbfounded. Then Karen hit me with her pièce de résistance, a printed permission letter, signed by the HOA president herself, dated during our vacation, giving herself preliminary approval for the construction based on long-standing neighborly agreement. It was pure theater. When I asked how the HOA could authorize construction on someone else's private lot, she leaned forward and said with a practiced smile, "Well, Alex, if the land wasn't being actively used and no clear objections were raised at the time, we considered it communal in spirit." Communal in spirit. That was the moment something inside me snapped. This wasn't just an overstep. It was a coordinated effort, a quiet invasion wrapped in fake smiles, buzzwords, and laminated guidelines. The HOA wasn't just enabling Karen, they were actively supporting her. And they didn't care about property lines. They cared about power, appearances, and punishing anyone who dared to say, "This isn't okay." So I went home, poured myself a drink, and called my lawyer. Karen wanted to play games with clipboards and committees. Fine. I'd play with legal documents and court orders. By the time I walked into my attorney's office, I wasn't just frustrated. I was on a mission. I'd spent the previous night creating a folder thicker than a college thesis. Surveys, photos, neighbor testimonies, GPS coordinates, even screenshots from our home security footage showing the construction crew pouring concrete while we were 3,000 miles away, sipping pina coladas, and blissfully unaware of the siege back home. My lawyer, Leslie Grant, was a calm woman in her 40s who had the kind of razor-sharp tone that made judges straighten their backs. I handed her the folder and gave her the abridged version. She skimmed through the papers like she was reading a breakfast menu. When she got to the HOA letter suggesting I match my paint to Karen's garage to foster cohesion, she blinked once and said, "Oh, it's that kind of HOA." She wasted no time. Within 48 hours, she filed a cease and desist order and initiated proceedings for a civil lawsuit against both Karen and the HOA. Unauthorized construction, encroachment on private property, willful negligence, and emotional distress. We weren't just demanding removal of the structure. We were demanding compensation for damages, legal fees, and a public retraction of the HOA's claims. When Karen was served the papers, I heard about it from my neighbor Bob, who witnessed her meltdown in real time. She stormed out of her house like a sitcom villain, he told me, grinning. Had a manila envelope in one hand and a garden rake in the other, started yelling about being persecuted by the anti-community engineer. Pretty sure she meant you. That same day, things escalated. Suddenly, our home became the center of a smear campaign. Karen took to the neighborhood Facebook group, writing long, passive-aggressive posts about new residents who don't understand the heart of the community and people who weaponize legality to destroy harmony. She never mentioned my name, but she did post a photo of my driveway with the caption, "Sad how some choose isolation over unity." I tried to ignore it until Julia found flyers in our mailbox and several others claiming we were trying to sue a widow over a few feet of dirt. She even included a QR code linking to a donation page titled, "Support Local Spirit, Defend Karen's Family Garage." She was literally crowdfunding her defense. You couldn't make this up. A few of the more gullible neighbors began giving us dirty looks. One even asked me in the grocery store if I really hated garages that much. I told him, only the ones that trespass. But others quietly pulled me aside and thanked me. "We've all been dealing with Karen for years," said one man. whispering like she might hear him from 3 blocks away. She once tried to fine me for leaving my Halloween decorations up past November 1st. Meanwhile, Leslie gathered momentum. We brought in an independent land surveyor and a contractor witness who testified that Karen's crew had altered the original construction plan mid-build. It was clear they were over the line, he told us, but the client said not to worry about it, that it was all approved by the HOA, which of course it wasn't. And here's the kicker, the original permit Karen submitted to the city. It only showed construction on her parcel. The moment we pointed that out, the city building inspector flagged it for violation of code and false declaration. Now it wasn't just a civil matter, it was potentially municipal fraud. By the end of the month, Karen's sweet suburban empire was crumbling faster than her vinyl siding in a windstorm. The HOA's smug letters stopped. Their lawyer sent us a request for mediation. Leslie smirked and said, "Now they're scared." And they should be, because this wasn't just about a garage anymore. It was about drawing a line and making damn sure no one ever dared to cross it again. Courtrooms always look less impressive in person. On TV, they're majestic, full of oak and thunderous judgment. In reality, fluorescent lights, coughing jurors, a judge who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else but presiding over a case involving a suburban garage war. But to me, this was battlefield ground zero. Karen entered like a suburban general, flanked by a team of attorneys dressed like they were auditioning for a legal drama. She wore a pale lavender suit, her hair stiffer than courtroom etiquette. She didn't glance at me, but I could feel her eyes searing into my forehead, like I'd personally bulldozed her flower beds. I sat next to Leslie, calm on the outside, but my palms were sweating bullets. Opening statements were polite but razor-edged. Karen's lead attorney, a smug guy named Vince who probably ironed his socks, began spinning the story like he was talking to a group of third graders. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about property lines. This is about community, about history, and about a woman who simply continued a tradition with the understanding of her late husband and their neighbors. It's about a misunderstanding, not malice. Leslie stood slowly, calmly. This case is not about community. It's about private property being invaded without consent. It's about an association acting beyond its legal boundaries. It's about entitlement disguised as neighborhood spirit. First, we brought out the land surveyor. He spoke like a man who'd spent years measuring things and didn't appreciate people questioning his tape measure. The garage extends 2.5 meters, about 8 feet, beyond the legal boundary of Mrs. Johnson's property. It is indisputably on Mr. Reynolds' land. Next came the contractor. He testified that mid-construction, Karen instructed him to adjust the alignment. She said the previous owner never minded the space being used. I expressed concern, but she waved it off, saying she had HOA approval and a community covenant. I didn't question it. That's on me. The judge scribbled something. Karen's attorney objected on irrelevance. Overruled. Then we played video footage from my security cameras, time-stamped clear as day, showing Karen supervising the construction like a smug foreman, pointing where to pour the concrete, on my side of the property line. Karen's face tightened like someone just told her the HOA was being rebranded as a democracy. When it was her turn to testify, the real show began. She tried the sympathy route first. I've lived in this neighborhood for 22 years. I've organized picnics, managed seasonal decorations, ran the HOA by myself for 3 terms. I simply carried on an agreement that had always existed, informally, yes, but never challenged. Until now. Leslie leaned forward. Mrs. Johnson, can you produce any document, email, text, handwritten note that shows this agreement? Karen blinked. Well, no, but we'd had a handshake. It was neighborly. That's how we did things. Leslie turned to the jury. And now you're asking this court to treat a handshake as legal permission to take 8 feet of land and build a permanent structure on it. Karen looked around as if expecting someone to jump up and say, well, when she puts it that way. Then she pivoted. If the garage is torn down, I will suffer irreparable emotional and financial damage. The structure cost over $60,000. It would be unjust. I could see one juror frown, but Leslie was ready. She presented emails between Karen and HOA members, some of whom later resigned, showing they knew the boundary was being crossed but supported her anyway because Alex is new, and if he complains, we'll pressure him out. The judge raised an eyebrow so hard I thought it might detach. After 2 days of testimony, closing arguments were swift. Leslie didn't overdo it. This is not just about cement and siding. This is about the message we send when we allow people to take what they want because it's convenient, because they know the right people, or because they assume no one will push back. My client pushed back. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. It felt like 3 years. When they came back, I held my breath. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Reynolds, the garage must be removed in full. Damages awarded, $150,000 to cover legal fees, land restoration, and emotional distress. I exhaled so hard I almost tipped over my chair. Karen didn't cry. She didn't faint. She just stared ahead like she was trying to calculate how many bake sales it would take to raise 6 figures. As I walked out of the courtroom, Leslie whispered, "You just made HOA history." Damn right I did. After the verdict, it didn't take long for things to unravel. Karen vanished from public view for a few days. Her blinds stayed drawn, her porch light flicked on even during the day, and her prized garden gnomes, once dressed in holiday themes, stood neglected, chipped, and slightly tilted, like little ceramic survivors of a suburban war zone. But then came the sledgehammers. 3 weeks after the ruling, a demolition crew arrived early on a Monday. They brought trucks, drills, and a court order taped to a clipboard. I sipped coffee from my porch as I watched them begin to dismantle the garage beam by smug beam. The entire structure came apart like a broken Lego set, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't smile at the sound of a wall crashing into a dumpster. A few neighbors gathered on the sidewalks pretending to check their mail or walk their dogs while clearly watching the spectacle. One guy even brought popcorn. Karen, meanwhile, stood behind her living room window in a silk robe, staring out with a look that blended disbelief, resentment, and mild constipation. But the drama didn't stop with the garage. Word of the court case spread faster than HOA meeting snacks. Turns out, Karen's solo rule over the HOA had been raising eyebrows for years, but no one had dared challenge her. Now, emboldened, residents started digging. And, oh, did they find things. Someone leaked emails where Karen threatened fines over seasonally inappropriate wreaths and tried to get a neighbor's backyard trampoline declared an unauthorized vertical structure. A couple on Maple Drive revealed she once wrote them up for excessive bird sounds. The phrase tyranny in khakis became a running joke. Within a month, an emergency HOA election was called. Karen didn't even try to run. The ballot listed her name anyway, scrawled under Other with a note, "Only if we lose our minds." She was officially voted out, and her replacement, a retired teacher named Joyce with a love for transparency and lemonade, held the first open HOA meeting on her driveway with folding chairs, iced tea, and actual laughter. It was weirdly wholesome. As for Karen, she didn't move out, but her empire crumbled. No more rulemaking, no more passive-aggressive flyers, and no more unauthorized architectural side quests. She walked slower now, head down, as if weighed by the shame of a garage that once was. Me. I planted wildflowers where the garage used to intrude, and every time one bloomed, I thought, that's one less inch of Karen's nonsense fertilizing my yard. A month after the last plank of Karen's garage was hauled away, I built something new in its place. Not a garage, not a shed, but something far more satisfying. A fire pit patio and grilling area, complete with comfy chairs, string lights, and a reclaimed wood sign mounted proudly on a post. It read, "Here once stood Karen's garage. May it rest in pieces." Below it, I added in smaller font, "Private property. HOA opinions not welcome." That weekend, we hosted a neighborhood BBQ. Julia made her famous jalapeno cornbread. I manned the grill with tactical precision, and even Sophie set up a lemonade stand that somehow turned a profit. Neighbors came. People laughed. Someone brought potato salad in a Tupperware the size of a carry-on suitcase. When everyone had a plate in hand and a drink nearby, I raised my glass. To Karen, I said, pausing just long enough for the awkward glances. Her garage taught us all a valuable lesson. Don't build on someone else's land. And definitely don't bring HOA drama to an engineer with a legal folder and a measuring tape. Laughter erupted. Even Joyce from the new HOA board chuckled into her iced tea. As the sun set over Quiet Lane and the smell of grilled ribs mixed with fresh wildflowers, I sat back in my chair, took a sip of cold beer, and smiled. Finally, the line was clear. And I had the patio to prove it.